Hello, thank you for waiting for me. All right, and so I have kind of the typical names. So today we're doing the last assignment, the civil rights movement. All right. So what I did is I tried to incorporate the two major types of historical methodology that they use. Oftentimes, they will do great man and great woman history, as well as structural history. And you guys have already seen some structural history. So, great man and great woman history is just that. It's you're looking at key individuals who utilized their agency, their power and influence to help determine the course of events, the way things went. Right. So, oftentimes, great man and great woman history focuses upon leaders of countries, right, for obvious reasons. But in this case, right, we have a group of outsiders who were not senators, who were not House reps, who were not on the president's cabinet, but people from the outside who made a lot of noise to help rectify injustices that were, social, economic, and political, faced by people, especially of certain ethnicities and colors of skin, as well as gender and sexual orientation, for that matter. So, at any rate, they began their fight for just that, the rectification of those wrongs. So, when you look at this, okay, this is a little bit redundant in the intro, right? Because it kind of gives a structural account of how Americans began to do better economically during the 1950s, but not all. About 1/5 of the population was not doing well at all and staying beneath the poverty line. But yet we're stifled in the Cold War culture, and had Jim Crow laws and other things that they still faced. So Mexican Americans, they still engaged in gerrymandering, whereby they would break up these enclaves of Mexican Americans, and they would turn them into 5, 6 different districts, and make each of the 5 or 6 parcels of the whole a minority group in a new district. And so that they would delineate the district lines in such a way as to manipulatively ensure that the Hispanics remained the numerical minority. Then, in addition to that, of course, they had literacy tests that were aimed to be used as an obstacle for Hispanics whose primary language was Spanish. They had poll taxes, by which they had to, pay a significant tax just to be able to vote. And that was a deterrent to some Mexican Americans who were living, just barely getting by precariously. You had the exploitation of workers and their proletarianization amongst Hispanics. A lot of them were in the service sector, working in the fields and doing jobs that were considered menial, wasn't much of a future in them as far as advancement, raises, etc., and working their bottoms off with their hands for very little money. You also had the systematic exploitation of immigrants versus the Mexican Americans who were nationalized or born in the U.S., and they were pitted against each other. You also had, especially in Texas, you had segregation in schooling, and you had literally brown schools for Mexican kids that they had to attend, just like the black kids did, have their own separated, segregated schools. You had contracts as far as giving loans to people, as far as renting and selling land and property and homes. Some people signed contracts promising that they would not give a loan, they would not sell their home, etc., to a Mexican American family, and so they were undergoing that as well. If you pick the one on schools, the video on schools, you'll see that the Mexican kids were streamlined into the proletariat. They were taught oftentimes vocations. They were given vocational education rather than standard, classical education, like Greco-Roman works, reading the classics, preparing for college. Instead, they were streamlined to the wood shop classes and other things, just assuming as the counselors and the principals just assumed that was the realm where Mexican Americans belonged. And of course, in the Mexican American places, you had a reliance upon income for each local public school based upon tax revenue. And so if you had a lot of poor people, a lot of unemployed people, and people who were earning cash that was not on the register, the schools didn't earn that much in the Mexican American neighborhoods. And so they had poor quality everything. You can imagine with technology and textbooks, poor salaries for teachers. So a lot of teachers would rather work somewhere else and get paid better in a nicer neighborhood. And so they had plenty of things and they felt like they had no representation in Congress, both first the Republican Party in the 1800s and then the Democratic Party in the 1900s tried to take them under their umbrella. But that's just what it was. Only having two parties instead of multiple parties, like in Europe, you have to incorporate a lot of different demographics under each party. And so the Mexican Americans felt like they were never truly represented by the Republicans nor the Democrats. All right. So at any rate, we're number one. What I do on number one is I say the old school LULAC, right, League of United Latin American Citizens, as well as its counterpart, the NAACP for African Americans, that they did their part. I try to give them their credit. They fought for and they won some important cases. There was a Mendez case in Texas that was big on overturning segregated schooling. There was, in addition to the real big one, Brown versus the Board of Education. But the thing is, right, like with the Brown versus Board of Education, 10 years later, it was not being enforced. It still was not being enforced nearly a decade, or pretty much a decade later. And so victories in the courts only went so far. And I'm saying those who took to the streets and engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience were more effective, that they were necessary, that they got the ball rolling a little bit more effectively, a little bit more quickly than their counterparts working in the courts. All right. And so remember, with nonviolent civil disobedience, you have this idea that there are man-made civic laws, and then there are higher humanitarian laws, or laws according to like God. And sometimes the man-made laws get it right, and sometimes they don't. So if the man-made law is wrong, you have every right in the name of this higher law to peacefully protest and defy that wrong, that morally wrong law, and do it in good conscience. And then when you're likely to get a violent and defensive reaction from the powers that be, you expect it, you take it in the chin, and you don't retaliate. And then what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to get television coverage of it, and it's supposed to win empathy from the majority of Americans. So there's hope, right? That racism is taught, that it's more nurture than it is nature. And so if something is learned, it could be, quote, unlearned, right? And so there's that hope that the majority of Americans were, as King put it, were tending their own gardens. That's a Roman term for meaning that they weren't interested in politics. They were only interested in their private lives. So if it didn't affect them in their private lives, they just went about living and just kind of ignored it. But that majority who likely lived that way, they needed to be shocked in seeing the ugliness of racism. So I don't know if you guys have seen, you could YouTube Birmingham footage. It's incredible footage of the way they treated nonviolent, civil disobedient members in the city of Birmingham. They put the hoses on them. They sick the dogs on them. It's ugly, and it makes you angry. It makes you sad. And that's exactly what it's supposed to do, because it's supposed to awaken the majority of Americans who have been taught either to just tend their own garden or to be racist, to second guess their assumptions about other demographics. So at any rate, look what Martin Luther King said. We will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And in winning our freedom, so will we appeal to your heart and conscience that we will win you over in the process. All right. And NBC aired a 3-hour special on the American Revolution of 63. And what they found is that a lot of Americans were sympathetic to the civil rights cause, and the numbers were growing. So hence, right, that this nonviolent civil disobedience by SNCC, by amongst Mexican Americans, it was Mayo, and they were winning sympathy for their cause. Right, you had CORE with the freedom rides down into the South. And then before you know it, in a lot of these cases, you had volunteers and the growth of movements, especially like I said, in like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of white, middle-class, college-educated Americans who began participating with the protesters. Then on number 2, I said, there's no one-size-fits-all tactic. That yes, nonviolent civil disobedience did its job in winning over and winning the hearts and minds and the sympathy of a lot of Americans, but not all. Believe it or not, you could watch some of that ugly footage, and some racist Americans enjoyed it. They enjoyed seeing Black Americans, Mexican Americans being beaten, being arrested, etc. So I said there was an element of the population that needed to become a little bit afraid and kind of fearfully respectful of these groups. And so hence you had the Nation of Islam, you had the Black Panthers, and then you had amongst Mexican Americans, the Brown Berets. And they, for their part, said that they weren't as interested. They weren't going to beg to sit at the white man's table and to be integrated with them. They got a sense of pride in who they were. They wanted to segregate themselves and be amongst themselves. And they said that they were for protecting themselves, even if that meant that they had to use violence. So at any rate, you see here, it's not the integration that Negroes in America want, it is human dignity, said Malcolm X. So then, one of the biggest pieces of evidence that I have is with affirmative action, is when President Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson, asked Congress to pass laws for affirmative action. And that was to ensure that you had a proper representation in publicly subsidized schools, as well as jobs, a representation of people of color. Okay, and have like quotas for so many Mexican Americans to hire, so many African Americans to hire, etc. That he tried to win over their hearts and minds on more than one occasion, and it didn't seem to work in Congress. But then when the Watts riots happened, he told them, he said, see, they're getting angry because they don't have a piece of the pie and they don't have a stake in society. If we don't help integrate them and give them opportunities, they're going to rebel even more, and we're going to have riots everywhere on our hands. So it was that fear of violence. It was that fear of a rebellion, of a revolution, arguably, that got congressmen to finally be okay with passing laws for affirmative action for people of color and women. All right. That's the 10-point program of the Black Panthers. And then number 3, I do great man and great woman history. I said, what if it weren't for these people? So Irene Morgan, right? And refusing to give up her seat. And then, of course, Rosa Parks in the same situation years later. helped get things rolling. You had the Little Rock Nine, who integrated themselves into a newly integrated school as Black students, and it got a lot of attention and so forth. So you have people now taking initiative to get this ball rolling. So when you look at the videos, you see leaders. You see these great leaders like Cesar Chavez with the United Farm Workers Union. If you watch that video, you're going to see with Mayo and the Mexican American Youth Organization, Jose Angel Gutierrez, and how much he single-handedly did to organize Mexican Americans. They would go door to door, register them to vote. They would have fundraisers and help them to pay their poll taxes. They would have English classes to help them pass their literacy tests, and did everything they could. And then, of course, they would have Mexican American candidates that they would plead with their people to elect into office. All right. And then you had the birth in Denver, Colorado, of the Mexican American National Political Party, their own party known as La Raza Unida Party. And again, you watch the video on that, and you take people like Jose Angel Gutierrez out. You take people like Corky Gonzalez out. And do you even have it happen? The December 9th walkouts in LA, that was led by Sal Castro and other Hispanic teachers. They were pivotal in what they did. Okay. It's a Little Rock Nine right there. And then lastly, a structural history. Well, we've already touched upon. So World War II, forces larger than any individual helped contribute to the civil rights movement. World War II, we talked about rising expectations with the rhetoric of World War II and the Atlantic Charter, fighting for the dignity of all human individuals, and the double standard that we had with the Zoot Suit riots, the discrimination of Mexican Americans fighting in Italy, the discrimination of African Americans, clearly, during the war. And so that hypocrisy was just too much for some people to handle. You had women of color go and work in the war industry jobs, and they were given great wages, but horrible discrimination. And so the hypocrisy of all of it became very apparent. And then coming from it, you had the GI Bill, which helped push Mexican Americans into the white collar middle class, subsidized their college education, subsidized their home purchase, etc., their business loans. And so then you had with the Cold War trying to win over Asian and African countries and Latin American countries. And then there was a sense of responsibility, like, well, maybe we ought to treat the Asians, African Americans, and Hispanic Americans a little better. And it's not a coincidence to a lot of people that a lot of these leaders of the Chicano movement and of the civil rights movement were college educated. All right. Then I asked you to watch one of these videos, Taking Back the Schools, pretty self-explanatory. The Struggle in the Fields, Chavez and United Farm Workers Union. The Quest for a Homeland, Tiarina, and the desire for Mexican Americans to get their land back, all the way going back to the Mexican-American War. And Fighting for Political Power, Gutierrez, Corky Gonzalez, and the Mexican-American Party. All right. So I want you to choose one of them and then address these. What injustices are being addressed? What methods were employed? What key individuals led the movement with their skills, personality, etc.? And personally evaluate both the efficacy and the morality of their tactics and leaders. All right. So political organization, nonviolent civil disobedience, the boycott, the strike. You'll see evidence of all of that. All right, does anybody have any questions? All right, you guys, kind of a short one. That's it. This is our final assignment.
Do we still have like class on Monday?
So Monday, yeah, I would come because I'm gonna go over your final.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just one more meeting.
Okay. Have a great day. Is this it?
This is it. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You as well. And thank you, Jose, for coming.